Section 1, Subjective Mind, Subsection C, Psychology, Mind, Der Geist, Supra Subsection A, Theoretical Mind, Theo is God, and Reti is net, and Ikal is in reference to, so theoretical is in reference to the net of God, or that which makes you fishers of men. Metasection Beta, representation or mental idea. Verstellung, quantum section gamma gamma, memory Gedächtnis. Encyclopedia section 461. Under the shape of memory, the course of intelligence passes through the same idea causing, recollecting, functions as regards the intuition of the word, as representation in general does in dealing with the first immediate intuition. And for section 1, making its own the synthesis achieved in the sign, intelligence by this idea causing, memorizing, elevates the single synthesis to a universal, in essence, permanent synthesis, in which name and meaning are for it objectively united and renders the intuition a representation. Thus, the important connotation and sign being identified form one representation. The representation in its idea making capacity is rendered concrete and gets existence for its import, all this being the work of memory which retains names and is called long term memory. Encyclopedia section 462. The name is thus the thing so far as it exists and counts in the ideational realm. And for section 2, in the name, reproductive memory has and recognizes the thing, and with the thing it has the name, apart from intuition and image. The name, as giving an existence to the content and intelligence, is the externality of intelligence to itself, and the idea making capacity or recollection of the name, in essence of an intuition of intellectual origin, is at the same time a self projection to which intelligence reduces itself on its own ground. The association of the particular names lies in the meaning of the features sensitive, representative, and utilitarian. The association of the particular names lies in the meaning of the features sensitive, representative, or utilitarian series of which the intelligence traverses as it feels, represents, or thinks. Given the name lion, we need neither the actual vision of the animal nor its image, even. The name alone, if we understand it, is the unimagined representation. We think in names. On mnemonic in opposition to memory. Mnemonic is connected with the common preposition. Mnemonic is connected with the common prepossession about memory. In comparison with falsification and imagination, as if the latter were of a higher and more intellectual activity than memory. On the contrary, memory has ceased to deal with an image derived from intuition, the immediate and incomplete mode of intelligence. It has rather to do with an object which is the product of intelligence itself. Such an affinity oswendigos, as remains locked up in the home world, invendigas, of intelligence, and is affected intelligence being only its outward and existing side. Encyclopedia section 463, infra section 3. As the interconnection of the names lies in the meaning, the conjunction of their meaning with the reality as names is still an external synthesis. An intelligence in this its externality has not made a complete and simple return into itself, but intelligence is the universal, the single plain truth of its particular self divestments, and its consummated appropriation of them abolishes that distinction between meaning and name. This extreme idea making capacity of representation is the supreme self divestment of intelligence, in which it renders itself the mere potential being, the universal space of names as word not yet defined. Kenosis. The ego, which is this abstract potential being, dwelling in unlimited subjectivity, is at the same time the power over the different names in potentiates. So far as they merely are potentiating and intelligence is here itself their body, its power is a merely abstract objectivity called memory, which, on account of the complete projection in which the members of such series stand to one another, and because it is itself this projection, though only abstractly objective, is called mechanical. See Encyclopedia section 195. A composition is, as we know, not thoroughly conned by rote until one attaches no meaning to the words. The faculty of conning by rote series of words, with no principle governing their succession, or which are separately meaningless, as with a series of proper names, to effect status without an understanding of their synthesis, assuming there is one, is so supremely meaningless because it is the very essence of mind to have its wits about it. Whereas in this case, the mind as spirit is estranged in itself within a cocoon of lies, and its action is like machinery, efficient and highly productive of any product fed into it. It is only in uniting egotistical goal with true utility that the mind is not crazy. Encyclopedia section 464. If it is to be the fact in true objectivity, the mere name Hegel as a mimetic device requires something else to be interpreted by the representing intellect. Hegel, the Holy One. Now, in the shape of mechanical memory, the intellect is at once the external objectivity and the meaning. In this way, the intellect is explicitly made an existence. In this way, the intellect is explicitly made an existence of this identity. In essence, it is explicitly active as such an identity, which, as arranger, it is implicitly. Memory is in this manner the passage into the function of thinker, which no longer has a meaning, for its objectivity is no longer severed from the subjective, and its idea making capacity does not need to go outside for its projection, as it is interwoven in the fiber optic cables of the universe, passing from redundancy, posing as historian, into active region, into active reason, which is archivist. Section 1, Subjective Mind, subsection C, Psychology. Mind, dear guys, super subsection A, Theoretical Mind. Theo is God and Reti is net, and Ikal is in reference to so. Theoretical is in reference to the net of God, or that which makes you fishers of men. Metasection Gamma, the thinking. Das Denken, Encyclopedia section 465. Intelligence is recognitive, seething light for information. It cognizes an intuition, but only because that intuition is already its own. See Encyclopedia section 454. And in the name, it rediscovers the fact. See Encyclopedia section 462. But now it finds its universal in the double signification of the universal as such, and of the universal as immediate or as being. Finds in essence the genuine universal, which is its own unity overlapping and including its other, viewed by us as being. Thus, intelligence is explicitly and on its own part cognitive. Virtually, it is the universal. Its product, the thought, is the thing. It is a plain identity of subjective and objective. It knows that what is thought is, and that what is only is insofar as it is a thought. The thinking of intelligence is to have thoughts. There are as its content an object. These are as its content an object. It knows what thought is, pardon, it knows that what is thought is, and that what is only is insofar as it is a thought. See later Encyclopedia section 521. The thinking of intelligence is to have thoughts. These are as its content an object. Encyclopedia section 466. But cognition by thought is still in the first instance formal. The universality of its being is the plain subjectivity of intelligence. The thoughts, therefore, are not yet fully and freely determinate, and the representations which have been made an idea to thought are so far the given contents. Encyclopedia section 462. As dealing with this given content, thought is meta infrasection alpha. Understanding with its formal identity, working up the representations that have been memorized into species, genera, laws, forces, and similar categories, thus indicating that the raw material does not get the truth of its being save in these thought forms. As intrinsically infinite negativity, thought is meta infrasection beta essentially an act of partition, judgment, which, however, does not break up the concept again into the old antithesis of universality in being, but distinguishes on the line supplied by interconnections peculiar to the concept. Thirdly, meta infrasection gamma. Thoughts supersede the formal distinction and institute meta infrasection gamma. Thought supersedes the formal distinction and institutes at the same time an identity of the differences, thus being nominal reason or inferential understanding. Intelligence, as the act of thought, cognizes, and meta infrasection alpha 1 understanding out of its generalities the categories explains the individual and is then said to comprehend or understand itself. Meta infrasection beta 1. In the judgment, it explains the individual to be an universal, species, genus. In these forms, the content appears as given, meta intersection gamma, but in inference, syllogism, it characterizes a content form itself by superseding that form difference with the perception of the necessity. The last immediacy still attaching to formal thought has vanished. Encyclopedia section 467, as dealing with this given content, thought is understanding, with its formal identity, working up the representations that have been memorized into species, genera, laws, forces, and similar categories, thus indicating that the raw material does not get the truth of its being save in these thought forms. As intrinsically infinite negativity, thought is essentially an act of partition, judgment, which, however, does not break up the concept again into the old antithesis of universality in being, but distinguishes on the lines supplied by the interconnections peculiar to the concept. Thirdly, thought supersedes the formal distinction and institutes at the same time an identity of differences, thus being nominal reason or inferential understanding. Intelligence as the act of thought cognizes, and understanding out of its generalities, the categories, explains the individual, and is then said to comprehend or understand itself. In judgment, it explains the individual to be an universal, species, genus. In these forms, the content appears as given, but in inference, syllogism, it characterizes a content form itself by superseding that form difference. With the perception of the necessity, the last immediacy still attaching to formal thought has vanished. In logic, there was thought, but in its implicitness. And as reason develops itself in this distinction lacking medium, so in consciousness, thought occurs as a stage. Encyclopedia section 437 note. Here reason is as the truth of the antithetical distinction, as it had taken shape within the mind's own limits. Thought thus recurs again and again in these different parts of philosophy, because these parts are different only through the medium they are in and the antithesis they imply, while thought is this one and the same center, to which, as to their truth, the antithesis returns. Genius A thinks like genius S, and without regard to the logic of projection E, the outcome of genius A, given the same logic of projection E, will be the outcome of genius S, modified by time and alliances withdrawn from projection E. Encyclopedia section 468. Intelligence, which as theoretical appropriates an immediate mode of being, is noun that is has completed taking possession in its own property. The last negation of immediacy has implicitly required that the intelligent shall itself determine its contents. Thus, thought, as free notion, is now also free in point of content. But when intelligence is aware that it is determinative of the content, which is its mode no less than it is a mode of being, it is will. The man possessed by legion showed will when he requested assistance from Jesus. Legion showed will when he requested to be sent into the pigs on the hill and go for a swim. Section 1, Subjective Mind, Subsection C, Psychology, Mind, der Geist, Supra Subsection B, Mind, Practical, der praktische Geist. Encyclopedia section 469. Encyclopedia section 469. As will, the mind is aware that it is the author of its own conclusions, the origin of its self fulfillment. Thus fulfilled, this independency or individuality form the side of existence or of reality for the idea of mind. As will, the mind steps into actuality, whereas, as cognition, it is on the soil of notional generality. Supplying its own content, the will is self possessed, and in the widest sense free. This is its characteristic trait. Its finitude lies in the formalism that the spontaneity of its self fulfillment means no more than a general and abstract ownness, not yet identified with mature reason. It is the function of the essential will to bring liberty to exist in the formal will, and it is therefore the aim of that formal will to fill itself with its essential nature, in essence, to make liberty its pervading character, content, and aim, as well as its sphere of existence. The essential freedom of will is, and must always be, a thought. Hence, the way by which will can make itself objective mind is to rise to be a thinking will, to give itself the content which it can only have as it thinks itself. True liberty, in the shape of moral life, consists in the will finding its purpose in a universal content, not in subjective or selfish interests. But such a content is only possible in thought, and through thought, it is nothing short of absurd to seek to banish thought from the moral, religious, and law abiding life. Encyclopedia. So, that there is in reference to those who say, walk with God, experience life as it comes to you, go with the flow. Hegel is saying, be mindful of every level of existence you can understand. If you can understand what's happening in space, understand space. If you can understand what's happening in the air, understand the air. If you can understand what's happening in the governments, understand the governments at the national level, the international level, the national, the state, or even local. If you can understand what's happening in your neighborhood, in your household, understand it, think about it, and will, what do you wish would happen if you could touch it? If you could touch Saturn's moon, what would you will to do with it? If you could touch the sky, for instance, if you could influence political life, if you could, what would you do? And in doing this, you will see that added to will, even if it's the will of God that flows through you, you have your thoughts. And thoughts plus the will of yourself, the will of your family, the will of your government, the will of your God, are a form of prayer, and that will at least be more evident. It will be more evident when your prayers are answered if you at least thought about how you would have changed it if you could. So if you think, I wish the president would forgive all student debt, or at least get us out of default, and you've thought about that for years. And when it occurs, one or both or the other, then you can say, I thought about that years ago, and there it is. And you will appreciate these things more, the things that occur in life. You'll have an affinity for life. You'll want to live life. You'll want to think about how you would change something. So that guy who says, if I were him, I would, he is adding thought to will. And who knows? Maybe his will be dominant over your will, just because he has added thought to it and he's added words or speech. Encyclopedia section 470. Practical mind, considered at first as formal or immediate will, containing a double ought. The ought is very important for anyone who understands the Magna Carta agreement with the British ruling royal family and their constitution. Uh, it uses the agreement between, uh, let's say, Parliament and the people and the royal family, which has ruled that land and many lands around the world uh, for millennia. uh, no matter what happens, no matter how things occur, no matter revolutions here, withdrawal, or put things back, the family comes back. So the word ought becomes very important when thinking about anything that establishes itself as absolute, including the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights. They ought to be as written. And we do our best, most of us who are attorneys, to get to that ought. But they are not absolute until they are. And even if they are absolute probably temporarily. Encyclopedia section 470, Practical Mind, considered at first as formal or immediate will, contains a double ought. And for section 1, the first ought is in the contrast, which the new mode of being projects outward by the will and offers to the immediate positivity of its old existence and condition an antagonism. Ought forms which in consciousness grows to correlation with external objects, the very definition of a cipher. And for section 2, the second ought is the first without contrast. An antagonism ought forms which in consciousness grows to correlation with external objects, the very definition of a cipher. The first self determination, the second ought being itself immediate, is not at once elevated into a thinking universality, making it at the point of realization, the latter, which virtually constitutes it in point of matter, a distinction which only exists for the observer. The observed is aught else than it is. See for reference the Quran Beheld by Noah Harold M. Keller, canonical entry 112. Section 1, Subjective Mind. Subsection C, Psychology, Mind, der Geist. Super subsection B, Mind, Practical, der praktische Geist. Metasection Alpha, Practical Sense or Feeling, der praktische Gefühl, or Gefühl. Encyclopedia section 471, The Autonomy of the Practical Mind, at first is immediate and therefore formal. In essence, it finds itself as an individuality determined in its inward nature. It is thus practical feeling or instinctive action. In this phase, as it is at bottom a subjectivity simply identical with reason, it has no doubt a rational content, but a content which, as it stands, is individual and for that reason also natural, contingent, and subjective, a content which may be determined quite as much by mere personalities of want and opinion, similar exigencies, and by the subjectivity which selfishly sets itself against the universal, as it may be virtually in conformity with reason. An appeal is sometimes made to the sense feeling of right and morality, as well as of religion, which man is alleged to possess, to him benevolent disposition, and even to his heart generally, in essence to the subject, so far as the various practical feelings are in it all combined, so far as this appeal implies. And for section 1, that these ideas are immanent in his own self, and for section 2, that when feeling is opposed to the logical understanding, it and not the partial abstractions of the latter may be the totality. The appeal has a legitimate meaning. But on the other hand, feeling too may be one dimensional, unessential, and bad. The rational, which exists in the shape of rationality when it is apprehended by thought, is the same content as the good practical feeling has. But presented in its universality and necessity, it is in its objectivity and truth. Again, the rational, which exists in the shape of rationality when it is apprehended by thought, has the same content as the good practical feeling has, but presented in its universality and necessity, in its objectivity and truth. It is, in a way, silly to suppose that in the passage from feeling to law and duty, there is any loss of import and excellence. It is this passage which lets feelings first reach its truth. In another way or operation, it is suspicious, or even worse, to cling to feeling and heart in place of the intelligent rationality of law, rights, and duty, because all that the former holds more than the latter is only the particular subjectivity with its vanity and caprice. Encyclopedia section 472. The ought of practical feeling is the claim of its essential autonomy to control some existing mode of fact, which is assumed to be worth nothing save as adapted to that claim, but as both in their immediacy lack objective determination. This relation of the requirement to existent fact is the utterly subjective and superficial feeling of pleasant or unpleasant. For example, the United States Congress ought to, but the demerit party is in power and has agreed temporarily to support angelfish, so sharks who are expansionist businessmen are left with an unpleasant feeling while angelfish is a pseudonym for foreign bank accounts. And by the way, this entire summary is recorded on a Motorola through Bluetooth, a Motorola Android phone, uh, through Bluetooth of what are now called Ray-Ban Stories by Luxottica and Meta, but when I purchased them were Luxottica Ray-Ban Facebook Stories, and I'm using the recording feature to do so. And I'm going to end on Encyclopedia section 472, though I ought to go on a bit longer.